Hey, World's Finest True Believer listeners. I wanted to make a quick announcement before we begin today's retro episode. This will be the last time World's Finest True Believers will be dropping an episode on Wednesday. Effective next week with our new episode, we will be dropping all episodes on Mondays. Usually Mondays have been when we have dropped Marvel Alliance. However, Travis and I want to change when we record that show, and this was the easiest solution. So again, effective next week, World's Finest True Believers will drop every Monday, and Marvel Alliance will drop every Wednesday. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you enjoy this retro episode, and I will see you all next week for a new episode of World's Finest True Believers. Hello, and welcome to World's Finest True Believers. Each episode, a guest and I will discuss one of our favorite comic book arcs or graphic novels from any publisher. My name is Chris. Thanks for joining us. Now let's get started. So we have a new guest tonight. Tim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, first off, I want to say my name is Tim Rooney. I am a filmmaker and podcaster from Long Island, New York, and I'm very thankful that you've invited me to be part of your show here and talk about the graphic novel at hand.
Great. No, thank you for coming on. It's a great pleasure. I know we go back and forth, talk a lot on Twitter, and hear your questions and comments on all the Squadcast shows. So I figured you would be a great guest to invite on. And thank you again for coming on. So you said you're a podcaster. What are some of your podcasts?
Yes, I have two shows. My personal show is called the Anything Goes podcast, where myself and a myriad of my friends near and far talk about geek and pop culture, whether it be movies, comic books, or books, regular books themselves. And we kind of go like a breakdown of the story, our feelings towards it, and kind of like a little bit of reflection upon it. And the other show I do, Please Rewind, the RF4RM Retro Show, part of the Real Fans for Real Movies podcast network, where it's a very similar format, but myself, Jamie Drewley, and Guy Milks, we talk about movies when it comes to their anniversaries. And we have an upcoming episode that we'll record next week, by the time of this recording anyway, that we're going to do The Crow for the 25th anniversary. And that's what we kind of like, we talk about the history of the movie itself, our personal history. I like to throw in little fun facts about the making of, and I kind of give context of what the world was like at the time. And so we just like reflect upon the movies, say, hey, what it was like then and how we feel about it now.
No, it's great. I've definitely listened to your Rewind podcast. It's a lot of fun. You guys go into some good depth, but as I said, it gives me some good laughs with your discussions.
Yeah, and like it is kind of it's a subconscious thing that at least for me, I realized like I try to make my co-host Jamie laugh like every episode. Like Guy, I can make him laugh pretty easily. That's the I would say like he's got a real easy funny bone like myself, and so does Jamie. But like it is nice when I crack both of them up. It's usually unintentionally when that happens. When we were talking about the movie Black Dynamite a few months back, like I was not the biggest fan of that movie going in, but then we were just talking about the jokes in the midst of the conversation, and all three of us just stopped for about solid 30 seconds because we were just laughing at the ridiculous punchlines of his humor. And that's the kind of atmosphere I like to have, that it's just a couple of friends talking about movies. And I try to make it at least a little bit of educational. I don't want to like make it seem like you're eating like, oh no, it's an educational podcast. There's plenty of those out there. I like to have a little bit. It's like edutainment. That's the kind of thing I try to strive for with both of my shows.
Nice. No, and for listeners, definitely check out both his podcasts. Like I said, I definitely listened to the Rewind podcast, so can highly recommend that one. And of course, if the quality is great on the Rewind, then your other podcast is definitely worth listening to as well. You also said you're a filmmaker. What are some of your what's kind of your genre?
I like to, like, I'm a big horror movie fan. I like comedy as well. I know those are the two most subjective and hardest genres to try and to tackle, but I like being scared. I like that kind of adrenaline rush. I mean, even to the point that there's, I realized at one point I had two separate Psycho posters, like little small ones, like 11 by like 17 inches, like on my walls in my bedroom. And my bedroom's at the end of the hallway at the very end of the house. And I realized that I'm in the living room on all the way to the other side of the house, and it's happened just to glance down the hallway and towards my room, and there's a little bit of light reflecting off one of the Psycho posters and everything, and I scared myself at one point.
Oh wow!
Yeah, because it was a custom poster for a company that we have here on Long Island called Retro Picture Show, where they show movies on 35 millimeter film. or 16 millimeter film. They tried to make the theatrical exhibition like kind of like how it was with these movies came out. Like last night, I just saw The Warriors on 35 millimeter film, and it was
Oh, very cool.
yeah, it was a lot of fun, and the print was like the best. The worst thing that could happen was that like if the colors run, depending on how old the print is, like if they can go to a kind of pinkish magenta shade. Like we saw Alien my friend Mike and I saw Alien a few months back, and that kind of happened. But The Warriors was pristine, and when they showed Psycho, they were giving out these kind of lobby cards and posters if you wanted to buy one. So I did, and it was just Psycho, and it's an artist rendition of the reveal what Mrs. Bates looks like at the end. So it was literally that her face at the end of the hallway, and it scared myself. And I'm like, geez, of course this would happen. And it's those kind of moments I strive for. The stuff I make. I blot a bunch of my shorts on YouTube. A few of them have gone to a few film festivals. And I am in the works of making my first feature film that I'm hoping to shoot later this year.
Oh, very, very cool. Can you tell us, is it going to be horror? Can you tell us anything about it?
Yes, it is kind of a thriller horror. It's like I'm kind of a whodunit, and it's based on like there is a certain genre of horror movies called giallos, or they were Italian horror movies, kind of like they were based on these kind of murder mysteries that were in the 1930s, and they were called giallo because they were printed on this cheap yellow paper, giallo being yellow. And starting with like 1965, called Blood and Black Lace, Mario Bava made this kind of murder mystery with this kind of faceless killer, and you'd see like it's usually very garish colors, lots of red, lots of green, and usually black leather gloved murderers. And Dario Argento would follow that up in 1970 with The Bird with Crystal Plumage, and so on and so forth. And my movie is kind of like that, but it's taking a look at the fame of YouTubers,
okay,
and the new kind of form of celebrity, and how things can get out of hand when you put yourself out there like that. The premise is that a photographer heads back to Long Island to investigate the disappearance of her twin sister, who happens to be a YouTube celebrity, but she ends up in the crosshairs of a psychopath and trying to figure out what happened to her sister and the myriad of suspects that are in her life that could have done it.
This definitely sounds like a film up my alley, so we'll definitely have to let us know when you finish it does come out so we can publicize it as well. It sounds really interesting.
Thank you. And like I'm aiming for it to be a Christmas movie. That's what I'm thinking. It'll also be taking place at Christmas. One of the reasons why, like, nobody will bat an eye at a red and green lighting scheme, because like that's just that like it will just be like, all right, that just you would go hand in hand. Plus holiday movies, everybody's looking for them, and some of the best horror holiday movies like Black Christmas, that's another big influence I'm taking into this movie, which I just got on Blu-ray and I'm so happy with, and can't believe they just announced another remake from Blumhouse coming later this year, which I'm curious about. I mean, I enjoyed their Halloween, like their remake of it, so I am cautiously optimistic about that. I will go in with like, all right, let's see what happens.
No, that's great. It's got to be the attitude you got to have. You never know unless you try. So that's awesome. Well, again, thank you for coming on this show. First question I asked all the guests is, what was the first comic or graphic novel that got you into the genre?
Batman: The Dark Knight Returns was the first graphic novel I ever bought. It's the first comic I ever bought on my own.
Okay. Well, what about it drew you to it, or what kind of hooked you for it?
I remember this specifically because I wanted to read comic books. I'd read like tie-in comic books with movies. Like there was a Batman Mask of the Phantasm comic book, like a miniature one, which was kind of like a tie-in of the movie, where it's kind of just like an abbreviated version of the movie itself. I think Batman Forever did something very similar to that. And so I wanted to read a Batman comic, and I didn't know where to start. So I just went to Google and said the best Batman comic books. And it led me to a list, top 25 best Batman graphic novels by IGN.com. And I guess I don't know if it was foolish or not. I just literally went to number one, and I'm like, okay, that sounds cool. And I just went to my comic book store. I picked up The Dark Knight Returns, and this is when I first like got my own car and everything. And it was one of the first purchases I had. Like, all right, I'm just gonna go out and do this. I came home. It was, I guess it was like, I'm still in high school at this point, and I just sat in the backyard and I started reading it. I'm like, I'll read a few pages, then I'll go in. Read it cover to cover, and like by the time it was done, like the sun was about to set. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's probably why it was getting so much darker in the story here. I thought it was just, I was that unaware of the surroundings because I was just that sucked into that story, and it's kind of remained a favorite of mine ever to this day.
No, it's definitely a good one at that point. Well, so let's talk about what it's not your first one, but it's definitely one of your favorites. What are we talking about tonight?
Batman: The Long Halloween, which I'm pretty sure was the second Batman graphic novel that I picked up.
I'd say you got a 1-2 punch there with what you did. So
Yeah, and I realized I could have like set myself up to like going right to the best of, and then like everything else could have been disappointing afterwards. But thankfully, it's not like that, and I've learned to love a lot of other Batman stories. I've kind of taken the kind of approach that Grant Morrison has to comic books is like every point is valid, every iteration is valid, and that's how I kind of like see like there are certain Batman stuff that's not going to be for me, but I'm like, you know what, that's just as valid as what I enjoy. That's why like for the longest time I did not like Batman Brave and the Bold because I thought that was just like, oh, it's kiddie Batman and everything. I want everything to be dark and serious. This is when I started reading the graphic novels, and then when I started watching the show years later, I realized, oh, now I know what they're going for, and I became a lot less judgmental when it came to Batman stories.
gotcha. So you said you read this pretty much shortly after you did The Dark Knight Returns.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Let me read a synopsis from Amazon about this, and we go with Christmas, St. Patrick's Day, Easter. As the calendar days stack up, so do the bodies littered in the streets of Gotham City. A murderer is on the loose, killing only on holidays. The only man that can stop this fiend? The Dark Knight. In a mystery taking place during Batman's early days of crime fighting. Working with District Attorney Harvey Dent and Lieutenant James Gordon, Batman races against the calendar as he tries to discover who Holiday is before he claims his next victim each month. A mystery that has the reader continually guessing the identity of the killer. This story also ties into the events that transform Harvey Dent into Batman's deadly enemy, Two-Face.
I think that's very descriptive and very apt, but it kind of spoils a little bit of the story there.
Little bit at that point, but it's the mystery behind who Holiday is what it even still surprised me when I reread it again for the pod. So let's talk about kind of the creators of The Long Halloween. Jeph, we'll start with Jeph Loeb, the writer of it. Do you know anything about Jeph Loeb's background? He's pretty interesting one, kind of a man in two worlds.
Yeah, and it's something that I would love to have his career, being able to like I can go and make movies and TV and comic books. Like that's something like a dream come true to me, and something that I want to do in my life. I mean, he produced two screenplays back to back that turned into movies, and they were both big hits, both Teen Wolf and Commando. Mm-hmm. And with that success, he was kind of brought into Warner Brothers to like, hey, I heard you we might be making a Flash movie after the success of Batman '89. And so after that kind of fell through, they said like, oh, you want to write comics and so on. And then he ended up going, I think it was Challenges the Unknown was the first thing he did. Mm-hmm. And it's very different, like, because I never read a challenge. I picked up that trade because Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale worked on it just because, and I never read a Challenges the Unknown comic beforehand. I know the easiest joke you can make about them, like, oh, it's the first draft of the Fantastic Four, and it kind of is, because I believe it was Jack Kirby's creation before like he went back to Marvel, and because he had flip-flopped back and forth between the two companies throughout the years, and I just kind of like, all right, and I just ended up reading most of Jeph Loeb's work when it came to DC. I mean, I have obviously The Long Halloween, I have Haunted Night, I have Hush, I had Dark Victory. I mean, Jeph Loeb was the first, other than Frank Miller, was like the first comic book writer that I kind of latched myself onto because I found his career very intriguing.
No, definitely. And he comes from my home state of Connecticut. Was born and raised in Stamford, Connecticut. I found it interesting, little note. Apparently, his stepfather was vice president of a college, and he met a writer at the time, Elliot Maggin, who apparently at the time when Loeb was young, he suggested a story that would become a storyline for Superman called Must There Be a Superman?
Huh.
So apparently Superman number 247 in January 1972.
Curious.
Yeah, I've been hopefully on DC Universe. I'm going to try to look at that and see what little Jeph Loeb, what nugget he put in his head to create this story. He then attended Columbia University and graduated with a Bachelor of the Arts and Master's degree in film.
I guess it's like one of the last bastions of like, I guess that previous generation, like you need to go to film school to be a filmmaker, even though throughout history there were times where you didn't need to do that. But there obviously, because of the success of the movie Bratz, and a lot of them went to cinema school, it makes sense why Jeph Loeb would want to pursue that, because like he has admitted in interviews that he's a huge fan of, like, he spent up like late nights watching like Warner Brothers gangster movies like Little Caesar and Public Enemy and so on and so forth.
No, and it's interesting, like you said, with Teen Wolf Commando, he had a nice 1-2 punch with getting noticed. Flash forward. I mean, he wrote scripts and got on to Smallville. His script focused on the episode Red, introducing Red Kryptonite to the show. Then moving on to Lost, then jumping on Heroes, and now he's the head of television of Marvel Television. So I mean, you get the film and television side, and then you got, like you said, he dabbles into comics, and he himself goes back and forth from DC and Marvel. And now more tied to Marvel, but in the early years he was going back and forth to DC and Marvel.
Well, yeah, I mean, much like other big creators, they would play in two worlds, and I guess it's become less frequent if that happens. It seems like a lot of people will plant their flag, and that's how it is. I mean, that's why it was such a big shock when Bendis came from Marvel to DC. I believe that was last year when that was announced. And I mean, but then you have people like Grant Morrison who walks between both worlds, and he's written Marvel and DC. But then you have Whedon, who's only written, I think, Marvel comics. I don't think he's written any DC comics. I may be mistaken. I'm sure somebody will correct me with that. But it is fascinating to see that he was able to keep himself busy that way with TV, movies, and then with comic books. And I know Loeb has kind of gotten a little bit of a reputation because he had put out that statement years ago saying that the Marvel Netflix stuff was obviously connected to the MCU. Mm-hmm. And as things gone on, it's really not become the case. I mean, there's no way they would not be able to acknowledge this. And it was kind of a weird separation, oh, you're the TV and we're the movies. And now with Marvel Netflix done and Disney Plus on the way with Marvel TV shows, maybe there's a chance. Who knows? We'll just have to wait and see.
No, definitely. It'll be interesting to see what Disney Plus does. You had mentioned with his side of DC, obviously Long Halloween and sequel Dark Victory and the Halloween specials for Marvel. He worked on Age of Apocalypse and Heroes Reborn version of Captain America, and then kind of what I've affectionately known as the color novels of Daredevil Yellow, Spider-Man Blue, Hulk Gray, and eventually what finally got published, Captain America White. Have you ever gotten a chance to read any of those?
I have not. I've not. I'm ashamed to admit I've not read his Marvel work. I realize I read a lot more DC than I have Marvel, and that's something I'm consciously trying to rectify.
It's all good. Everything is good, and I can definitely recommend it. This one's a personal journey. His for focusing on those characters are all personal journeys, so I definitely can recommend. You won't be disappointed. One of the things I remember reading before moving on to Tim Sale was the issue focusing on his son, Sam, died in 2005 at the age of 17 of bone cancer. But they did in 2006, his son had a story published in Superman Batman that was nearly completed before his death. Jeph Loeb finished the work with the help of 25 other writers, the who's who of the industry. Jeff Johns, Rob Liefeld, Joss Whedon. It was also entitled Small Little Arc in the Superman Batman story, Sam's story dedicated to Sam as the inspiration to Clark to later become Superman. Have you ever gotten a chance to read that issue?
No, but I know the reputation, and I've realize I want to read that, but I feel like I'm just gonna end up in tears by the end of that story. but I was saying it's a bad thing. I mean, I realize that I'm usually an emotional mess. I am the most emotional person in a movie theater. Any really sappy stuff, it always gets to me. And I feel like I'm just gonna be just making all the pages wet just with my tears. It'd be like old Looney Tunes, when they're reading a newspaper and they get sad and it's the ink running. That's what I imagine what's gonna happen if I read that comic book right there.
Well, you got DC Universe, so you can just cry on the screen or cry on the keyboard. It'll be okay. But yeah, it will tug at your heartstrings. The stories that are in there are great. It's definitely one of my favorite issues. So anything else, Jeph Loeb, that you want to talk about before we move on to Tim Sale?
No, I think we can move on to Mr. Sale himself.
Okay, so what kind of information do you know about Tim Sale's background?
That I do not know too much about. I will fully admit that. I mean, I know he was working at independent comics before he had met Loeb, and that he had a little bit of reputation, but it was kind of they had met at, I think, a Comic-Con years before Comic-Con became the pop culture mecca that it is today. And they're like, all right, I guess we'll work together. And like the reason why they got along so well is that like Sale didn't want to work with anybody else and he liked working with Jeph. And so they had this weird, even though Jeph was kind of like very particular with how he wanted his panels laid out, and like whole pages had to be started over because of him not particularly liking something. So that's why Challenges Unknown took so long to come out. And I like Sale's style because it is very different. It is very dramatic. It's very a lot like, especially Batman, like his ears, like I think his ears when it comes to Batman are probably the length that I can accept without them going to be too obnoxious. I mean, any longer you could probably toss him and he would stick out the wall like a lawn dart. That's what I imagine. And so and he just like throw him like, and then you hear like a as he reverberates sticking out of the wall. Like that's, and I know people have issues with like his style saying it's too much, but I think when it comes to at least with the partnership with Loeb, the style works. And I've seen panels for Superman for All Seasons, and I love like how the design was used for that. And I was we had mentioned on Twitter that I was reading Dark Victory after I finished Long Halloween. Even that's different. It is similar, but the colors are very different compared to the colors of Long Halloween, and it's a sequel to that. So it's nice to see that there was a evolution with their creations as they went forward, starting from Challenges and going forward.
No, you're right. Especially the use of light in Long Halloween and how light is used. It's very interesting how he's very aware. He actually hails from Ithaca, New York, but spent most of his early life in Seattle, Washington, where he attended the University of Washington for 2 years before moving to New York City to attend the School of Visual Arts. And so that's kind of his little background. Like you said, he's basically kind of, him and Jeph Loeb have been, the kind of their own dynamic duo of whatever Jeph seems to write, Sale seems to do the art for it.
That's why I felt like, as much as I enjoy Hush and I really dig Jim Lee's art in that, it was jarring the first time I read it because I'd read Long Halloween, then I read Dark Victory, and then I read Hush, and it was like, oh, I recognize the voice, but the art's different here. And it was a little... It was, like I said, I had to wrap, it took a little bit for my head to wrap around it when I started reading that story, because I'm so used to those two, the pair of them working together. So it was a moment of like, okay, I'll go with this to see how it plays out. By the end, I was happy with the Jim Lee's art and everything. It was just a little bit of getting adjustment to at the very beginning.
No, that's interesting. You're right. I had not as well versed when I started reading Hush with Loeb and Sale, so I didn't have that. But that's interesting to say that you kind of read a lot of Loeb and Sale together, and so when you get a project with Loeb and then another artist, that's very interesting. And I could definitely see that because he has a certain way, like you said, his voice and how he writes the characters. So that's definitely very interesting. As we start getting into Long Halloween, did you find out anything interesting about the creation of Long Halloween?
Well, I love it. Like from the very beginning, I had never read the introduction to the trade paperback, the one I have, and I realized that like the whole conceit of that came from former editor Archie Goodwin, who was kind of like their person who oversaw the work that Loeb and Sale did on the Halloween specials, which was later collected into Haunted Night. And he was like, I love, and like the quote being, I love what you guys did with gangsters. And even Loeb is recognized like, there's not any gangsters in that. Like, yeah, sure, the Penguins in one of the stories, but I think it's because how they use criminals within the confines of those stories. And the fact that like the Legends of the Dark Knight was going on at the time where you had all these different tales being spun of like between years 1 and 5 of Batman. And the fact that, speaking of that they want to continue from the year 1 storyline where we had James Gordon with his wife Barbara and like their son James, and we have Carmine Falcone, and so on, and then how his relationship with Catwoman is very contentious to say the least, and how the tit for tat and the cat and mouse on that's an unintentional pun there between Batman and Catwoman throughout the story. It's really interesting to see how it went through. And I love the fact that it curbs so much from The Godfather throughout the story, even from lines of dialogue dialogue to framing. And like you said before with Sale's art, that, yeah, his use of lighting, his use of shadows is like what they would call low-key lighting. Like you think of movies where it's like, it's one light source and there's a lot of shadow. You think of a lot of like movies directed by Clint Eastwood are very low-key lighting where it's just like one light source and that's illuminating the entire room, or like David Fincher is very much like that. Then you see like high-key lighting, which is like a lot of sitcoms, a lot of comedies where it's like there's no shadows, everything's very perfectly lit. And I love the use of light throughout Long Halloween by Sale's art, because it's like, okay, we're going to have like this one light source and that's going to illuminate everything here. And then we maybe have a thunder and lightning crack or what have you to show a little bit more of the setting around them. That is, I think, was a really cool decision on the creator's part.
No, I agree. And it's interesting because reading that introduction or something else I had read and researching it, I had to look up Archie Goodwin because I didn't know who he was, because I read something that their portrayal of Jim Gordon is based off of kind of how he looks. And when I pulled up a picture of him, I was like, yep, that fits. Loeb also had stated that part of the genesis was influenced by Mark Waid. He said that felt like he was missing something. He felt that, he got the Falcone family. He said it was just missing a big wallop. And that's when Waid had suggested maybe bringing in Harvey Dent, because it hadn't been depicted in so much depth since the year one story. So that kind of brought Harvey into the mix.
Which I think is a kind of a stroke of genius, and it makes sense that Mark Waid came up with that, because I think Waid's one of the greatest writers of the comic book medium, and having him like be the fall from grace, being like the kind of the backbone to the story, like, yeah, like the murder mystery gets you in the door, but what the story is really about is the splitting of Harvey's mind.
Mm-hmm. And even then, we'll go into later just the end of the gangster era and the rise of the rogues. And as some of them call them freaks at that point. So there's so much stuff going on, and reading it this time, I caught a lot of things. I was like, man, it was like first time reading it again, just catching all this stuff and going through the years. But before we start delving into this, any kind of basic background should someone know going into this? Any storylines or familiarity they need to have before jumping into Long Halloween?
I would say by bare minimum, you have to read Batman Year One.
Yes.
Just to know where the players are, where they are on the board, to see what the kind of journey that Bruce Wayne has gone through and where everybody is. And now I know maybe the depiction of Catwoman is a little dated by today's standards, but you just got to put in the context of where it was in 1989. And then, of course, I would say watch the Godfather movies just for the fun of it and everything, just so you can okay, what kind of context they're referencing through numerous moments throughout this graphic novel.
And that's exactly, just going through it myself, I had said, man, I don't know why I didn't notice it, how much little callback, little Easter eggs to The Godfather. But yes, Frank Miller's Year One is probably first on your list before delving into the Long Halloween. Let's kind of get into it, and you kind of lead us down the way, Tim, of, how you want to tackle it, favorite scenes, or kind of just as we go through it. It's a 12-issue series, but how you start us off of where you want to go.
Hey everyone, before we go to the next topic, we're going to head into some ads that help the Geek Ultimate Alliance keep the lights on. We don't get to choose what ads come on, and they sometimes can be a bit loud, so I want to give you a 3 count in order to give you the opportunity to turn your volume down before they come on. 3, 2, 1. We'll be back in a little bit.
Well, I would say, because I love the line of like, it's a summer wedding that's going on here, and this person, like, well, Johnny Vitti is the one who's getting married here, and was going to turn state evidence against Carmine the Roman Falcone, and decide to help him with his problems and pay for this wedding here. So now he's not going to testify against the Roman anymore. And I love the line, yeah, it's hot, but it's not as hot as the night that Johnny Vitti got married. I love that line that Selena says there, and we have with the layout of like this kind of almost like rooftop wedding that's going on here. But I think the first scene I would really want to talk about is the meeting of Batman, Gordon, and Harvey Dent on the rooftop of GCPD.
Mhm.
And eagle-eyed people know that seeing people in a certain stance and how the colors are, and like it looks eerily similar to a scene that happens in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight.
Yes, very much, and how much we'll be probably calling back and definitely mentioning at the influence of this on that movie.
Definitely. I mean, like the three of them make a kind of vow to try and take down the mob one way or the other, which I'm always curious. I was curious about this line here. The very last panel here is the three shots. Like, it's underneath them, and it's just like there could be no compromises, and yet dot dot dot. That's Batman's internal monologue, and he says, "Agreed." He agrees to the terms of this vow that the three of them have just taken. What compromise is he talking about there? That he's working with the law, or what? I'm still confused about his internal conflict there.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the sense of like Gordon's big thing is he'll let them bend the rules but not break them. And I think that's the compromise he's making in that, a lot of times Batman does break the rules to get, the job done outside of quote unquote killing. But, Gordon says we will work together. You will not break the rules. I'll allow some bending, but not breaking. So I believe that's the compromise he's making.
Gotcha. I mean, hell, he stole a ledger from the Romans' penthouse, and they're using that evidence against him. Like, in a court of law, that would be inadmissible because it was not obtained legally. And anything of that would be fruit of the poison tree right there. So I don't know what they would be able to, like, they'd have to build the case without that being there if they wanted to do this legally. That's the one thing I know. Another thing I noticed when I was rereading this for this podcast.
Oh yeah, we had to suspend that kind of analysis at that point because most of this stuff probably would be thrown out of court. But you mentioned that alliance scene, and in my research, Loeb had stated that this alliance between Gordon, Dent, and Batman was partly inspired by the Beatles. And this is a quote that he said that the spark I got was from watching the Beatles anthology documentary. I was fascinated by the idea that here were four men who were as close as could be, and because one of them turned away, put very simply, because John left with Yoko, it destroyed them. I looked at Harvey and Bruce and Gordon and Batman. I tend to think of Batman and Bruce as separate characters, and the creation of Two-Face seemed like an important turning point in Batman's life. So the Beatles of it all became part of the backbone of the story. So I thought that was really interesting of pulling. I would not have gotten that unless I read that. I read that interview. That's really interesting dynamic that he brought into it.
So now I have to reread this, and all the Two-Face dialogue later on I have to read in a Birmingham accent now or something like that. I'm just gonna read as one of the Beatles. I'm like, hold on, I'm just gonna jump to it now. My city.
I don't think you'll.
Oh, geez.
I don't think you'll get Harvey or one of them saying "I am the Walrus," but we'll eventually get there.
True. Nice gun, light 22 caliber, the perfect weapon to kill you with, and so on and so forth.
But you had mentioned earlier about Tim Sale's art. I kind of equate his artwork as very pulp. Very pulp comics, and just it's smooth, but it's gritty at the same time.
Yeah, because it's not a lot of messy lines or anyway but it's not like finely detailed. It's not like a Brian Boland comic where it's incredibly detailed and everything is very precise and everything like that. It is very pulpy. It would something like you could see this buying, like you jump back like almost 70 years. You can see this paying a dime or a quarter for these kind of stories. But since it is a murder mystery, that's something that Agatha Christie could have written, and or it could be in a Mickey Spillane novel for by any chance.
Yeah, definitely. We start with that kind of agreement between the crew. Anything else in the kind of the first issue that kind of stood out to you that was interesting?
After that, I love we see the construction of the famous murder weapon that we used throughout, but then we see Harvey Dent at his workbench in his basement, and it makes you look like, wait, is he somehow responsible? But then we see the baby bottle nipples at Gordon's residence, so it's making you, the audience, suspect both of them as possibly as responsible for what's going to happen. And then we have the murder of Johnny Vitti, and I love the fact that all the murders are in black and white, and we have like maybe a splash of color to sprinkle just to really punctuate the scene here, and it's the blood in the bathtub here.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely, and it's kind of like bringing up what I had said, like the use of light with Harvey and showing hints of Harvey's possible darkness at that point and how kind of his view of what's going on. And even the first time reading it, it was just like, it's such a misdirect. It's just like, nope, sorry, it's too simple to say that it's Harvey doing it. What did you think of kind of the introduction all of a sudden of Catwoman to this and the choice of costume?
Other than maybe the animated series, this might be my favorite Catwoman costume.
Very elegant, very classic.
Yeah, and it's like, it goes by comic book logic, because otherwise you would probably, being that's so skin tight, it'd be very hard to move and be acrobatic in. But it's within the realm of comic books, you don't question it, you just go with it. And you're right, elegant is the right word to describe it. And I like the relationship that both Bruce and Selina have and Batwoman and Catwoman have. But do they know each other's secret identity during the story?
My leaning was, there were so many different ways I picked up on it, but I don't think, if anyone, Batman and Bruce might know, but there are so many different ways that they never acknowledge it. So it may be one of these things that they might have an idea, but neither one of them wants to acknowledge it.
Right. I think by the time that Catwoman saves Bruce Wayne from Poison Ivy, I think that's when they know each other's secret identity. That's my guess anyway.
Yeah, and even then, one could, if he didn't know, one could chalk it up to the poison ivy kind of brainwashing him that wouldn't have realized and paid attention at that moment.
Right. I know I'm jumping a little bit ahead there, but the plot of using poison ivy to persuade Bruce Wayne to do the Rowan's bidding, two things. One, I find it is just in a body horror sense, but when Catwoman like tears at Bruce Wayne's suit and he's covered in ivy, makes my skin crawl. It's just very uncomfortable right there. I'm like, oh god, and I literally just start clawing myself, thinking like that's on me right there.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but it can't be good and can't feel good.
No, and then when the first time that Bruce and Poison Ivy come face to face is on like the veranda of his manor, it was just a very choice framing on that last panel there, that they're very close and very intimate, and I'm wondering, I'm like, are they supposed to be having sex there? I don't know. It leaves mine to wander.
Maybe that was the point, saying we're just going to leave this and you go with it where you want to go with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's not explicit or anything like that. It definitely made me raise an eyebrow there. And I love throughout the book, a lot of times we see Harvey drawn in like what they call Rembrandt style, where one side of the face is illuminated, where it's like one light source from like 90 degrees from them, that was style of Rembrandt painting. And so many times throughout this book that he's half in shadow, half his face in shadow, signaling that what is going to come to him later on, in the story.
Yeah, and kind of looking at the shadows, looking at how imposing Batman is done by Sale and doesn't back down, even from Solomon Grundy. You know, he towers over him, but he's not one. He's just makes him a very scary guy.
Oh yeah, and speaking of Grundy, I do like the fact that like on Thanksgiving that Batman gives him a plate of food for Thanksgiving.
Yep. He does have a heart.
Yeah. Well, I realized what the internal monologue for Batman is supposed to be upon this reading. The internal monologue is the humanity of Batman. That everything he speaks is the gruff and the legend that's supposed to be show fear or create fear in the hearts of criminals, but his internal monologue is his judgment, like he's questioning himself and he's wondering what he should be doing in a certain situation and wondering if he's doing the right thing or not.
No, definitely. That's a very interesting idea, that it's the human side, or who Bruce is speaking, not Batman. Batman is, like you're saying, is the one speaking out loud for him. What did you think of the quote unquote death of Dent and the kind of ruse they were trying to play on the gangsters in prison?
I mean, Halloween being my favorite holiday, so somebody do something as destructive, blow somebody's house up on Halloween is that's just rude of anything right there. And I feel bad for the Dents right there. And I just wonder, how did they know? I guess Dent just realized, oh wait, there's something wrong. They just jumped out the window at the right time. I guess that's how we go about it. But I love how like everything's very muted leading up to it. It's like very dark shadows, and then when you turn to the splash page, it's kaboom when the house is erupted into flames. There, I like that subtly leads the audience into like, okay, this is kind of how the world is. And then when we punctuate it with that moment, that's where we have a burst of color to emphasize the explosion there.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. And then just kind of seeing the first thing up, the Thanksgiving issue with saying Batman saying Harvey Dent is dead. Even though we as fans just like, no, he's not, but we'll go with it and we'll see what happens.
Right, and then the following scene is something I was mentioning before with where we have like we have light coming from outside, presumably from lights in the city, but then the rest of the light source is coming from the desk lamp in the traditional interrogation model of police procedurals right there.
Mm-hmm. No, that's one of my notes I wrote down. It's a very, very reminiscent of the old style that portrays in cops movies.
Oh yeah, like you see if like whether it be police procedurals or film noir, especially
Mm-hmm.
something like this is very apparent in that kind of style. And I love how Batman kind of got me into film noir in a very backdoor way because of me being a fan of the Batman the animated series that drew heavily on film noir, and seeing that kind of represented in this comic is just a person who's now a huge film noir fan now. It is just like so rewarding to me as a reader to see that kind of techniques utilized here.
No, you're right. And kind of, it's just every one of the covers is just awesome. That was one of my favorite parts of the whole series itself. Besides the story, is just the covers of Sale, and as you go through it, it just captures what you're getting into with each issue so well.
Definitely. I guess this is where it started with Sale's description or depiction, I should say, of Batman, that Batman must have 0.5% body fat, that he's incredibly jacked upon, like, it is ridiculous, like muscles on muscles.
Yeah.
I understand we're post-Image Comics boom right now, so I get that, but it's just ridiculous to see like how jacked it is. And I'm like, can he scratch the back of his back? Like it seems like he wouldn't be able to because he's got so much muscle mass on him.
No, true. And then you counter that with his depiction of Joker, which is lanky, the long fingers, the big kind of the all teeth. It was a very interesting way to portray Joker.
Yeah, very spindly and gaunt, and it's just another way of subconsciously to contrast the two of the characters. I mean, it goes back to their first like encounter. They're like Joker's very bright, Batman's very dark, so on and so forth. And if people are not, another thing I guess I should have mentioned earlier on, that as a kind of like a recommended reading before we get into this, is probably pick up Haunted Night so you can kind of ease yourself into this duo's depiction of these kind of characters, like especially people like Joker and later Scarecrow, and how very exaggerated the characterizations are.
Yeah, it is jarring if you've never seen it, except if you go into it. Just a fascinating take of it because it really does work with Joker, in my opinion.
Definitely. I mean, it's not as exact. It's in the footsteps of like you think of like late 80s depictions of the Joker. You think of Death of the Family. Joker is very similar to like this, and he's got his and just I guess a stereotypical point where it's a joke even in the movie Unbreakable that most of the villains have a very pointy chin. They come to a point like there where and when you think of heroes, you think very broad chinned and like and they're gigantic. Something like Sergeant Rock specifically, and it's just a nice exaggeration for the story, but it works within the confines of the stylization of this story.
No, you're right. And when looking at why it became like all the villains, Loeb and Sale said it wasn't their intent to use all the villains. It was the way the story went, where the gangsters were being forced out by the supervillains. Because of the story, he had free reign to take these characters to the edge and make them as distorted and freaky as he wanted. And he was grateful DC let him, because usually you make such changes with these characters. Some companies are depending at the time, would have been like, nope, you got to do it like this.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that if you listen to the interview that Jeph Loeb did with Kevin Smith on Fat Man on Batman, that Tim Sale fought tooth and nail with the depiction of Superman in that story.
Oh, wow.
Because it was off model. And I guess there's some leeway depending on a certain story, because I guess, I don't know if I'm not sure if that was originally published in Action or Superman books, or if it was his own miniseries. I do not know. At that point, I'd be like, all right, if it's his own miniseries, let bygones be bygones.
And I love, and it was never, and I had to look it up too with the introduction of Calendar Man. He's apparently been around since 1958, and this was my first and right now only introduction to Calendar Man. But the scenes, every single scene in this book, all I could think of was Hannibal Lecter, Silence of the Lambs.
He's very much like Hannibal Lecter here, but like I love how like it's a mixture of Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs and in Manhunter, because Manhunter, like, it's a stark white room in
Mhm.
with Brian Cox's Lecter, but in Silence of the Lambs, it's very gothic and it's very Southern Gothic, and it comes to the design, that just whole production design of that movie, Jonathan Demme's Silence of the Lambs. And I love how he's giving you clues the entire time, but it's in such, it seems like gibberish, and it seems like the ravings of a madman. Nobody pays attention to him. Nobody takes him seriously when
Mhm.
he identifies both male and female counterparts of the people who is Holiday.
And it's just a dismissal. It's like, well, what does he know? He's been locked up. How does he make this kind of assertion?
Right. I mean, like, they just think, all right, he's just a madman. We're wasting our time here. He was giving you clues, he's giving you hints, but you were, I don't know, too stubborn to admit it or realize what he was doing at that moment.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Batman just dismisses them and then kind of focuses on, catching the Joker.
Right, and because Joker's going on a rampage here, because Holiday is taking up his press, because Joker should be the only big dog in town in his mind, and this Holiday it's very much like Batman 89 that way, where it says, Batman, what kind of world that we live in that a man dressed up as a bat gets all my press? It's kind of the same motive here, but even like that he doesn't kill anybody here. He attacks people, but I don't think anybody dies. I'm double checking right now.
Yeah, I mean, he goes back after the Dents rebuilt their home, and I love the line kind of calling out after Harvey gives him a couple of punches, and then he knocks down Harvey and saying, what sort of man are you? This town isn't big enough for two homicidal maniacs.
Right. Before anybody writes in, yes, he did kill some of Falcone's guards with like a smiley gas right there, just Joker venom. Before anybody tweets to correct us. But I love the fact that, and he even goes to Carmine Falcone to find out what's going on here. And it's just like, get out, get out, get out. And Joker's plan, like many of Joker's plans, like it makes sense in his mind. Where he's like, well, I'm going to try and kill as many people as possible on New Year's Eve. And maybe I'll get lucky. Maybe I'll get Holiday in the collateral damage.
Yeah, just throw all the darts and one will hit. And this is actually the first time when we get to the New Year's Eve one where the killing, we've had a number of the issues where it's the bookend with the black and white killing. This is the first one that is in the middle of the story.
Oh, that's true. That's correct. Because I guess, like, you think, like, oh, because I guess they wanted to end the issue on a triumphant moment of Batman defeating Joker. I guess that's the reason why. Because the halfway point is when Alberto, Carmine Falcone's son, is murdered, but his body is not seen. Maybe that's why.
And until the very end, when you see him over the body that is Alberto in the Gotham River.
I think I know why it happens in the middle of the story and not at the end.
Okay, go for it.
Because it's not a true killing.
Ah, that's good. Yes, that would make sense. That with what is revealed later on. Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's why the status quo of the Holiday murders happening at the end of the story is broken there, which even happens later on with when it comes to Maroni's father. Doesn't end that story. It's Maroni's agreement to testify against Falcone is the one that ends that issue, and that makes sense because that's a great cliffhanger because you want to see what the next issue is going to be.
Yeah, no, you're right. Exactly.
I don't know what it is with, like, I guess later on where is towards Valentine's Day, and what's Dent's problem with Bruce Wayne that he just thinks that Bruce Wayne has everything handed to him and he just does not like the upper crust of society, I suppose.
Yeah, I'd written that down. It just the portrayals we've seen of Harvey prior to this, and even sometimes later, just didn't see. It seemed he came off so brash. It didn't seem like he's out. We know Harvey's trying to get his man, but just even to being as rude to Alfred, who it's just saying. It just seemed very out of character. But maybe he was just trying to jostle Alfred and trying to intimidate at that point. So it could just be a lawyer play.
I guess. I mean, that's good. I guess it's better than the explanation that he just hates blue bloods. I don't know.
It could too at that point.
Yeah, I mean that he's a working stiff and everything, and then everything's handed to him and so on and so forth. And I love like the Valentine's Day between Bruce and Selina is interrupted by this mysterious person with a rose, and I don't know, that just looks suspicious. I don't know why I would take a rose from them, I guess to be kind, but it just looks a little questionable in the moment.
And just the use of the color, even though we find out later it's poison ivy, but individual looks out of place where they're at.
I mean, I'm a pale person, but I'm not that pale. I think that would have raised some red flags there. But then again, it's Gotham City, so maybe this is just another day at the office.
Exactly. So just be nice to the old weird lady.
Right. And I love how the Maroni's restaurant looks just like the restaurant in The Godfather that that Michael Corleone meets the chief of police in Sollozzo at.
Mm-hmm. No, it throughout and later on, just all the winks and nods to that. What about kind of the introduction of Sophia Falcone? She's an imposing lady, I'll tell you that much.
Very, and it makes you question. Like, I mean, it's a great introduction that she's being released from Gotham Penitentiary in the dead of night, and it's thunder and lightning. It makes you wonder why the Roman just let her rot in prison for the longest time. And we find out later on that he does not have the greatest. He's not the most loving person in the world. He definitely favored Alberto over Sophia for sure.
Probably, even though we say favor in quotes, because Alberto, he turns, Alberto with his background of an MBA and going to Ivy League schools, when Alberto in the beginning of the story suggests something, it's like, no, I don't have to listen to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's another callback to The Godfather between Sonny and Michael Corleone right there, that Sonny doesn't want to listen to his younger brother in that regard. Yeah, it's just a very, very imposing woman. But I love that she is not just the muscle there, that when it comes to Father's Day later on, when she gets her father a gift, and he just kind of blows it off, and it's just like we linger in that scene. Just it's like her whole body just kind of like just sinks a little bit, because like, hey, this gift was, sure, it's not much, but it's made with love, and the Roman just kind of blows it off, and you feel for Sophia in that moment, and I feel bad every time I read that.
Just trying to do something to get the approval,
which I think that's. Every child does that. Every child has that kind of feelings and just wants to know that their parents are proud of them.
Mm-hmm. And I thought was a great changeover. Jumped ahead to Father's Day, but the April Fool's Day issue, that's got to be one of my favorites, because it's another callback. The juxtaposition between Riddler's theories and Batman's theories. That whole scene just seemed to me very similar to Usual Suspects.
Oh, for sure. When we had the theory that Verbal Kint gives to Kuyan, and then his putting things together, and so on and so forth, and how things are kind of laid out that way. I never put those two together, but Usual Suspects being one of my favorite movies, I think I just like that issue a lot more. And I realized that we're a murder mystery and we're all over halfway through it, and this is pretty much just a recap issue. And the fact that it happens on April Fool's Day, and that's why nobody is killed, I think it satisfies of a holiday striking, but not a murder.
But even like Riddler supposedly sees who Holiday is at that point and is so scared just because he got shot around that won't go and narc on who Holiday is.
Right. I mean, if I was the Roman, like just walking back into the restaurant and just hear the gunshots, I'm like, go back outside. Okay, did you see him or her? And tell me who it is. I mean, at that point, I'd be like, can you help me here? I mean, obviously, you're fine. We'll protect you if need be. But it's another thing where the Roman's sister Carla, who runs the Falcone family out of Chicago, or runs the outfit out of Chicago, I should say, and that she does not approve the using of quote unquote freaks of Gotham to do the bidding of the mob. And it's the erosion of organized crime to the rogues, like you mentioned before, and how it is a state of transition that back in the day they would never cross paths here, but the Romans becoming more and more desperate as they go forward.
And another callback to what would be in the Dark Knight, where, making the deal with Joker and then, at the end of the movie saying, I'm going to give this city a better class of criminal.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard. Like Tom Wilkinson's Carmine Falcone in Batman Begins, like that's my favorite scene in Batman Begins, is when Bruce Wayne and Carmine Falcone have a face-to-face in that like seedy bar down by the docks. And it's kind of hard not to hear Wilkinson's voice when I read this comic book now.
Yeah, because it just rings true as an old style gangster. One of my other favorite things that Sale did with the characters is Scarecrow, and how scary he kind of made him, in my opinion.
Or the fact that he looks like a legit scarecrow and that he's filled with straw and everything, and the ridiculous length of his hat and so on and so forth. And I love how we build that splash page of like Jonathan Crane has escaped, and we've seen the remains of what he's done in his Arkham Asylum escape, and then we get that splash page of him on the horse. I don't know, it's very dramatic right there, and almost like a callback to Dark Knight Returns, seeing Batman interacting with horses. I'm always down for.
Always a good time.
And the fact that like Bruce Wayne is trying his damnedest to keep everything together, and it ends up resulting him holding on to, I think it's his father's grave. And
Mother's grave.
Mother's grave, excuse me, because it's Mother's Day, and he's crying his eyes out there. Like, that's just a very dynamic image. And to see Bruce Wayne, who's obviously, like, a lot of people think that Bruce Wayne is the facade and Batman's the true face of this individual, seeing that at such a low point emotionally is kind of jarring for a reader, because you think of Batman being in such control whatever situation he's in. And
just, we kind of finally get that, what is the connection between the Waynes and the Falcones?
It leans into the fact that Thomas Wayne was a surgeon, and that Carmine Falcone was shot at one point when Bruce was younger, and Thomas Wayne operated on him right then and there. And we see, I realized that upon this reading, that how great of a person or great as a technician as Batman is combating crime, Thomas is just the same way when it just comes to medicine. And it's saying like how good he is applying his skill set. And it's so curious how Thomas and Bruce Wayne are so diametrically opposed when it comes to using the skill sets, where a doctor is meant to heal and help, and Batman is there to strike fear into it. They're both trying to stop something. Like, obviously, doctors trying to battle death every day, where Batman is trying to battle crime. It's just a very different way of like how they're using their desires to try and stop something. I don't know if I'm explaining myself properly there.
No, it's like you said, the old Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, while him patching him up is fulfilling the Hippocratic Oath, but what is he putting back into the world is destruction.
Right. But then mirror that with Batman not killing the Joker.
No, exactly.
Batman could have killed the Joker like that. And how much crime and pain and suffering would be prevented with that action.
That's a good point.
It's another thing, like the whole story here is built upon family. I mean, it's not as a obvious way as like Fast and Furious, like, oh, all about family here. But no, we have relationships with the fathers, like especially it's a highlight in Father's Day. We're introduced to Carmine Falcone's father here, and then Maroni's father, and then at the end we have Dent talking about his father, and that his father's in a nut house.
And then we get the flipping of the coin.
I guess his father gave him that coin during this latest visit. I assume that's why he's brandishing it here.
Just looking at it, just flipping it. It's like, oh, it's coming.
As Gilda, Dent's wife there, I think I'd raise a few eyebrows and some alarms should be ringing there that you're sitting in the dark flipping a coin.
He's down in the basement, shirt off. It's what guys do.
Obviously, I mean, duh. I mean, that's what we always do, right? Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's people out there who totally agree with that. But when we find out what Gilda's really doing, it makes sense why she doesn't say anything.
Hey, everyone. Before we go to the next topic, we're going to head into some ads that help the Geek Ultimate Alliance keep the lights on. We don't get to choose what ads come on, and they sometimes can be a bit loud. So I want to give you a 3 count in order to give you the opportunity to turn your volume down before they come on. 3, 2, 1. We'll be back in a little bit.
And I like the subtlety of Independence Day of, looking at Bruce, Gordon, and Harvey. Can any of them ever leave Gotham and want to leave Gotham? And it seems to be, out of all of them, Harvey is the only one really considering it.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going by the year one timeline, that Gordon is not a born and raised Gothamite. He came from Chicago and he transferred in there. And obviously the Waynes' roots are in Gotham City, but he has the opportunity to leave. Selina wants to leave, but he doesn't. They're just like, once I thought I was at, they pull me back in. And no matter what, they're always drawn to it. And they're always kind of dragged into the muck that is crime in Gotham City. And it's escalating due to the use of the holiday murders here. And it's so weird. Oh.
No, but even then, if they cut it, Selena just doesn't believe that even if Bruce would ever truly, something would always be calling him back. That's why I'm not even sure if Selena has figured out and Bruce has figured out who they each other are. And it could come back, flash forward, Tom King's run at that point, whether Selena could ever truly buy that Bruce would ever give up being Batman.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. But it's also curious that we have this odd relationship that Maroni and Sophia Falcone have had, that they were presumably lovers at one point.
Yeah, that was kind of it. When I first heard it, I was like, whoa, all right, we'll go with it. It's a little out of left field, but I'll buy it.
Yeah, and we've had the use of Vernon, the assistant to the district attorney, is actually a mole for Maroni and so forth.
Yeah, nothing was good that Vernon was giving Saul anything for his pocket before he went into the courtroom.
Oh, yeah. And we have a death of a coroner because they know the true story of here or what's going on. And then we have Batman take out Mad Hatter and the Scarecrow, and those are rogues that Sale and Loeb had used previously in the Halloween specials, which is nice to see him come back here. And we have more opportunities for Batman and Catwoman to have a life together, but it's just something that I remember I asked Denny O'Neil this question once at a Q&A, and I asked him, do you think Batman and Bruce Wayne could have a normal relationship? And he described it as Batman's mission is like going into the priesthood, where he made this vow to this mission, and whatever that will just have to fall by the wayside. Even though we want to see them have a happy life, it's never going to work out that way. And we see echoes of that in this story between the flirtations between Bruce and Selena and Batman and Catwoman.
I love how Selena's never been, and I've never ever thought of her being portrayed as a damsel in distress. She is truly, at least in this story, Bruce and Batman's equal, in the sense of that I can stand toe to toe with you, and I'm as smart and even more street smarts than you.
Oh, that even Batman can't even keep up with her in the chase, and then she knows the city better than him.
And despite how aerodynamics and science could just say, no, sorry, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and then how they portray the acid and the birth of Two-Face, I thought we just don't see it, and we don't see it until we need to.
Oh, because if you're a comic book reader, you know what's going to happen. And if you're not, you just see Vernon give Maroni something, and it's the old Hitchcock rule. It's the whole bomb underneath the table rule. Hitchcock described as you have two people sitting at a table at a coffee shop talking about baseball, and all of a sudden the table explodes. You get 5 seconds of shock, and you're like, whoa, unexpected. But you do that same scene again, but you show the audience there's a bomb underneath the table. However, the people at the table are unaware of it. You immediately build suspense. You know there's a little ticking clock underneath there. And I love how it continues to build throughout the testimony that Maroni gives to Dent during this court case, and how it ends with saying that the eternal monologue after Dent's been burned, I will never get the sound of his screaming. So powerful right there.
No, and it's just like, what sound it'd be? Was it Harvey screaming, or was it Two-Face coming out at that point?
I guess that's up to the reader's discretion to find out what you think it is.
And just that next issue of how desperate Batman's becoming, of trying to find out who Holiday is, going from Falcone to Catwoman to Dent's wife to Calendar Man. Nothing is adding up in his head.
Oh no, and even like something I'm just looking at this now, that we have this conversation between Gordon and Batman on the roof, and saying that Dent says, "Oh, Dent is Holiday," and then he questions Batman, "How long have you known this?" And Batman doesn't give him an answer, and he says, "I don't believe it." But Batman's got scruff under his face. He's got a little bit like 5 o'clock shadow, and for the most part, we've seen him clean shaven in the cowl.
And he knows he screwed up by not even letting Gordon in on his suspicion.
Yep, because they've made a vow to do this together, and they kept secrets from each other, and the chickens have come home to roost there.
And how did you like the reveal, or at least what we're meant to think of Holiday being Alberto Falcone?
I didn't buy it at first. I'm like, what? But then I was like, why? That was my next question. Why would you do that? Was it just to get the attention of his father there?
And that was my impression, especially when his father does show up. in the interrogation. And you gotta love another callback to Dark Knight when it's Batman underneath the police uniform.
Yeah, if like he literally beats Alberto to an inch of his life, which is something that's followed up in Dark Victory. And I know people who've made the assertion that like Batman can be written as a fascist character there, and you see Batman in the SWAT uniform and cowl, you can use that image as your grounding point right there.
Mhm.
And the fact that like Carmine comes to see his son, and it really was like, all right, because you never paid attention to me, so I decided to take out your subordinates and to hurt you, and this is revenge for it.
And you gotta like it that he calls it in saying Gotham is dead, that his kind are becoming bigger, the rogues, the quote unquote freaks.
Right. And the bell has been rung, and the changing of the guard is happening, and Carmine and Maroni and so many others are desperately trying to hold on to their seats of power here, and they're blind to the fact like, no, your day is done and it's coming, and it's coming with a vengeance, and it eventually happens to Carmine later on in the story.
And I'll tell you what, I as Two-Face comes in and sees Calendar Man, I laughed hysteric. I laughed when he flipped the coin if Calendar could come with them, and it didn't work out in his favor.
Sorry, click, turns off the lights. Like, oh, come on. Like, everybody else is getting out to play, and I have to stay in my glass cube. This blows.
And you gotta love Batman's entrance and the use in the fog of how he's taking out all these different villains.
I mean, if there ever was a Batman moment, it's theatricality and deception used to take out everybody. I mean, it's a very famous moment in Dark Knight Returns of him using like gas to try and take out people and everything. So it is the adage of like, you give Batman time to prepare and he will use it to his advantage, and he definitely does by systematically taking everybody out, with the exception of Catwoman and Two-Face.
Yeah, Two-Face killing basically the Roman without incident, just saying, bam, done. My vengeance has been had. Take me in.
Right. And then this leads to the only panel I don't like in this book. It's after the killing of the Roman, and Batman's holding out his hand to Dent. Says, I still believe in Gotham City. You were married here. You want to start a family. If nothing else, think of Gilda. It's just a very dramatic hand extension right there from Batman.
And oh yeah, he's got one more face of business. His lackey Vernon. He definitely's got to take him out before he's willing to be taken in.
Right. And then he's like, all right, now and we have the inverse of the meeting on the rooftop. Now we have Two-Face, Gordon, and Batman. And it leads to later on that like there were two holiday killers and they don't believe it. And I love the Batman asks, was it worth it? The promise we made to bring down the Roman, what it cost us, Harvey. And Gordon says, if you're asking, does the good guys win? Good guys win. Yes, the good guys won. But we won't know if it was worth it for a very long time. And it's just such a great button to put at the end of the story here.
Yeah, it's like, what are you willing to do? And is it worth compromising what you hold dear in your values?
And everybody does. I mean, we have Gordon losing his family, like pretty much we see him together, but as we know from Dark Victory, that does not work out. Mm-hmm. That Bruce Wayne lost an ally in Two-Face, and Gilda lost her husband, and then we find out that Gilda was the one really responsible here.
And I had to read that. And I still, when I reread it recently, I reread that section a couple of times just because saying, wow, what a change at that point. And that Harvey knew, but didn't want to, rat on his wife and bring her down, let her live and let Alberto take the fall because he's crazy enough to think he did it. And we know the truth.
Right. I think some people say like it's too heavy-handed and it's so much exposition at the end, but like you're at the end of a mystery, you need that. You need the kind of explanation there. And it makes you go back and, like any good mystery, you want you to go back to the beginning and reread it or rewatch it to see, does this work? Does this hold up? And it does. And the fact that the motivation that the audience can realize is that she did this just so she could have her husband back. She could have her husband more often because the Roman's gone. All of his subordinates dead. So they can really start a family together. That it was not done it was malicious, yes, but it was done out of love, which is a very twisted way to try to justify it to yourself.
Yeah, I would love to see like what kind of villain would Gilda be at this point. I mean, we know she's partly Holiday, but it would be interesting to follow up if they ever would follow up with bringing Gilda back at that point, because we always thought Gilda was just the doting wife, and this brings obviously a whole new dynamic with her. And as she's revealing everything, again, calls back to Usual Suspects as at the end of the movie when the cop is all of a sudden realizing he's been played.
Right. And now, based upon this conversation and discussion we're having here, I might have to rewatch The Usual Suspects tonight. I'm just being honest here.
That's not a bad way to spend your evening.
No, not at all. And especially see the evolution of Christopher McQuarrie going from a writer in that to director of the Mission Impossible movies nowadays.
You're right. I totally forgot about that. You're right. Wow.
And it makes sense. Like, you rewatch Fallout and you see how that kind of unweaving mystery there. You're like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense now.
See, now you're going to make me, now I'll have to watch, now I'll use something with Fallout. Again, I've got my whole weekend planned.
That's a great, nice double feature right there. I love programming double features in my head here. And so I think that would be a good one to do.
There you go. You got your next podcast lined up for you.
Oh, geez. Well, now I have to follow through with it.
So as we kind of bring this kind of to a close, what was kind of in your opinion, the impact beyond Long Halloween? What impact did Long Halloween have going forward?
Well, it obviously changed people's perception of what you could be done with Two-Face, what could be done with the Rogues. And you can tell a really epic, long storyline to go forward. And it's something that's obviously affected the way that DC has told their comics, because there seemed to be a perception or a business model that they're writing for trades. They're writing for long-form storytelling. It's rare to see like one-off issues nowadays. And it is kind of a shame. It's a lost art. I mean, that's why I think there was a detective run that Paul Dini did where like each issue was its own self-contained story. So I think that's the one, you can say, a negative on the storytelling of DC Comics, is that like everything must be a long-form mystery, that you can't tell self-contained stories. But it's nice to see the kind of like meticulous planning and kind of like how like you mentioned before, that all these villains being part of it was kind of like it just grew out of the storyline. It's very much like how Stephen King writes his stories. They're like, it's like, I have this idea and we just kind of run with it and see how it evolves on the page. And it's nice to see how it came to fruition in Long Halloween. And the other effect, obviously, is like it led to a great part of the DNA, which was Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, which is arguably, some people say, the best Batman movie. So I think it's kind of hard to deny the impact that this comic has had on Batman in general.
Exactly. And to your point, it led to a sequel, Dark Victory, and it basically became a trilogy with the third sequel with Catwoman When in Rome.
Which I want to get, but it is stupid expensive to get the trades. And I prefer reading physical to digital.
Oh yeah, no, it's a good story, and it was nice to see them focus on her when she leaves in Dark Victory of what happened.
You know, like I've spent a lot of money in the past like 2 weeks and everything. You're making me want to go to eBay and pick up that trade. You know that, right?
Don't spend a crazy lot of money. I'll tell you that right now. It is a good story, but I wouldn't go crazy spending for it. It's a good read though.
Okay, all right, then I'll keep my expectations right there. Like.
What kind of, as you chose it, what makes this one of your favorites, and what impact has it had on you, either as a fan or a reader or just you personally?
Well, because it doesn't forget the roots of what Batman is, that he is a detective. And the conceit of it being a mystery just goes hand in hand with Batman. I mean, there's so many times where it's like Batman versus a super villain and his plot. And you just kind of deal with the intention and obstacle kind of storytelling with that kind of idea. But having a mystery played throughout is just so intrinsically dealt with it, and it's done in such a masterful way, and it's coupled with Tim Sale's great artwork, and that takes so much from the Gotham, that takes so much from film noir. It's just a perfect combination of storytelling, of content and style, that it's something that, like, I read this like on my lunch breaks throughout this past week getting up to here, and most of my time my lunch breaks go by very fast. But this how concise the dialogue is and the storytelling here, that I would get so much reading done in just a 15-minute break or a half an hour break. And so I was really surprised by that, and it's how it just flows. And there's another thing that certain comics that happens today. I don't want to sound like a old man yelling at the sky kind of thing, but there's a lot of times where a lot of comics these days where it's just a lot of standing around and talking, and you get bogged down in that. There's not a lot of brevity in the storytelling, and I think that's one of the things that's the greatest strengths of the story, by weaving all these kind of the ideas as part of Batman, and with such, it looks effortless. And it's just like, wow, you think like, oh, this should be so easy, but it's not. It just looks easy. And I think that's the genius of Loeb's writing in this story in particular.
No, and I fully agree with that. One of the reasons I love this story is the depiction of Harvey Dent and the idea of the corruption of the quote unquote good man, the civil servant. Do the ends justify the means? And, how he is trying to hold on to being as the Dark Knight, the movie would say, the White Knight. And how he cracks and continues to crack so the pressure of the city is trying to basically tell him you can't be a good guy unless you're willing to compromise, and unfortunately it's present in our society today. And it's the question of, do the ends justify the means? What price are you willing to pay? How many lives do you have to lose in order to win?
Do you hear that? Same page.
Love it. And one of the questions one of my listeners had asked, and it's pretty obvious with this one, but I want to get Mason written in and wanted to add a question, and we've kind of mentioned it before to the kind of dialogue. And could you see this as a movie and or TV show? And we got gifted with that, with the Batman Begins, and then more heavily with The Dark Knight.
We have, but I feel like I know like there's a Batman Hush coming soon. I think Long Halloween's in the works. I feel like it could be done, but I think it needs the time to breathe.
Yes.
Trying to bring it down to 70 minutes, I think it will be robbing of the richness of the story.
I really agree with that. I think it needs it in order to do it right, which unfortunately I think will be more of the 70 to 90-minute arc, a two-parter, like kind of what they did for the animated Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that just kind of goes back to adaptation versus the original piece of artwork. I mean, like a piece of art, you say, like, you think of like Stephen King adaptations. Like a lot of the Stephen King adaptations that are really successful are the ones that are miniseries that take a lot of his work and like they take a lot of his writing and his prose into consideration when adapting it. And I think it's the kind of same thing here. I think it just kind of goes back to like, all right, some things have to give and some things will have to stay. And it's like, all right, well, I think every page in this thing is important. I think every panel in this important because it's so, like I said before, it's very concise in its storytelling. And so it's kind of hard to try and find ways you would try and cut the fat out.
No, I mean, I fully agree. And it almost like, what Legend of the Dark Knight, the comic series, is about, is just little self-contained, legends and doing kind of anthology series, either animated or it would be great to kind of see that if they ever would do something like that. But one can dream. So if someone were getting into this, even though we've completely spoiled the whole book, how would you, if you're someone coming off the street kind of like you did, and how would you recommend this to someone, and who would this appeal to?
I can recommend this to people like myself. Like, you can be a beginning comic book reader and you can get into this. And how I'd pitch it, like, since we're in a post-Dark Knight world, and I was like, hey, do you want to see the book that inspired the Dark Knight? Well, here it is. And that's like my elevator pitch for it. And if they want to press and they want to find out more information, so I'm like, it's a whodunit that goes across an entire year and brings Gotham City to its knees in terror.
Throwing out the word noir, it is a great noir, and it's what I'm hoping we get out of Matt Reeves' take on it, since he's been very, very emphatic in saying he wants to go back to the detective. He wants to go back to make it kind of a modern day noir.
Oh, yeah. I mean, take parts from this, you take parts from Dark Victory, you take parts from Batman the Animated Series. Like, okay, you have one light source and Batman just being a silhouette. You're halfway there, making everybody happy if you want to tell a film noir story of Batman on the big screen.
Mm-hmm. So, any final thoughts before we kind of close out the episode?
It's something that like I mentioned before, it's been a while since I've read, and I think I'm going to make it a yearly tradition to read this now. Much like how Christopher Lee would read the Lord of the Rings books once a year for decades, I think I'm going to try and do that with this book. I'm going to try and read it once a year now because of it had so much, I relished in so much enjoyment that I had in rereading for this podcast here.
The question I ask is, which holiday would you read it at?
I'd have to leading up to Halloween. I would have to read it.
Gotcha.
Maybe Devil's Night. I might read it.
Good. Well, I would love to have you back on if you wanted to go to Dark Victory or completely others. It's been a great conversation getting to finally hear voice to voice at that point. But would you want to do Dark Victory, or would you want to do something else?
I'd be down for Dark Victory and see how that goes for sure.
Awesome. Well, I know you kind of stated up at the beginning of the show, but why don't you tell how people can follow you?
If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Timothy Rooney2. My Instagram at TRooney1012. I mentioned before my podcast, the Anything Goes podcast, and Please Rewind, the RF4RM as in the number 4 RM Retro Show. You can find that wherever you can get podcasts. And there's my YouTube channel, Through the Lens Productions, where all my short films and all my video content is up there. If you want to see my latest short film, Handy, you can just type in Handy, Through the Lens Productions on YouTube.com, and it'll lead you right there.
Awesome. And again, thank you so much, Tim, for coming on. It was a great conversation. We definitely look forward to having you back on for Dark Victory soon. So as always, guys and ladies and whoever's out there, maybe some aliens listening as well, you can follow our podcast on Twitter at Finest Believers, and me personally at Chris Balga, Balga spelled B as in boy, ALGA. You can email the podcast at worldsfinesttruebelievers@gmail.com. Again, feel free to tweet, email if you want to be a guest, provide any feedback, ask questions, say that, hey, can you talk about this in your next episode? We'll definitely get it on. You please review on any podcast that you get from Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify. Love seeing that feedback. And you can find us on as many platforms, as I said, Apple, Google, Player FM, Spotify. If I'm not on something, please let me know and we will get it on and share the RSS feed. So again, thank you, Tim. And until next time, thank you again for listening, and have a good day, night, or afternoon whenever you listen to this. Bye-bye, everyone.